thank you so much for joining this evening here in Dubai. I know it's midday for some of you in the other countries. What we wanted to bring to you was what's probably now one of the key things that is on your mind when it comes to getting you to class in September. Obviously, visas have started. Some of you already have your visas in hand, which is fantastic. The first payment, as you all know, is due in the next couple of days. So your first tuition is due on June 1st. Then the next step is, what do we do when we arrive there? Where do we live? Who do we share with? I know for the majority of you guys, this has been a question that has came up for quite some time. The reason why we bring this webinar to you towards the end of May is because really there's not much else you can do in terms of organising your accommodation until around the July time. Okay, now what I wanted to do, sorry, just skip forward there. What we wanted to do was just to cover all of the kind of questions that you may have. Now, don't worry, the webinar is going to be recorded. So for any of you that maybe missed the first section, or maybe if any of you do have to nip off the call, then it will be recorded and sent out to you. Also, because on a lot of the slides, I'm not going to go into a vast amount of detail. A lot of the slides are for your reference after this call. So please do go over the slides in your own time. You can, of course, ask questions at a later date to your enrollment advisors. But this was just to give you a good overview as to what happens next when it comes to life in Boston. Okay, so what we're going to cover in the call. First of all, we're going to look at the financial side of things. So really what the budgeting that you should be looking at, what average costs are. For some of the master's students, I know this is going to be a discussion that you will be having with your parents. So really keep them involved with this, with the costs that there are going to be there. The next thing that we'll look at is where to look. For those of you who don't know Boston, haven't traveled there as of yet, I know that this is one of the most anxious parts is, okay, where is the school? How far do I stay away from the school? So we'll give you some key locations that will then coincide with costs and with travel time. Okay, we'll look into private rentals because this is really going to be what the majority of you will be looking at when you're looking at your accommodation. There are other forms of accommodation in Boston. You can look at things such as hostels, but that isn't something that we recommend. If anybody does want to look at those, then you would speak to your enrollment advisor separately for that. As for security, obviously that is our main priority with all of our students, so private rentals is really what we advise. We'll then look at how you actually get your property, so what you need to do in advance, what kind of key things that you need to look out for, again, security side of things and how not to be scammed. Very, very rare, but of course we would rather you were aware than not. We'll also look at general advice. So those key things that you'll need to know, maybe tips and tricks that you may not have thought as of yet. And finally, the sharing side of things, because that is really what we advise with students to do. It's going to be a big moving abroad. It's going to be a new program, a new city, new environment. So we feel that when you are doing that with other people, it's a much more supportive environment. Okay, where do you start? So I'm sure everybody is thinking of all of the questions that they have, what their parents are asking, what they're needing to do first. So what we've done here is we've basically just looked into what the key things are that you should be talking about, or what you should be looking at. For us, what the most important part is, what is your budget? Okay, because that really will determine who you live with, where you're staying, what kind of accommodation you're going to be able to stay in. And that is obviously something that you won't really be able to change once you have looked at your kind of your requirements, what your budget is for the year. Then that is going to really determine what the next stages are. Then, how many bedrooms? How many people are you wanting to share with? And this is something that you really need to be thinking about from a social aspect as well. Because you need to think of how comfortable you're going to be living with other people. You need to think of whether you want to stay in single sex, mixed sex, whether you would rather have one housemate or 3 housemates. So really you need to be thinking of what suits you best. And then from that, what you can do is you can identify how many people, who do you need to have that reach out to, okay? Then the type of accommodation, because there are different ranges of accommodation. You obviously have studio apartments, 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, you then have house shares. So again, really dependent on your personal preference and going back to the budget, what is going to be suiting you best. Then the key question, whereabouts to live. Now, this again is personal preference as to what you would prefer to do. Do you prefer to live close to campus, have a lesser commute? You probably are going to be seeing higher costs for that, but in terms of ease and accessibility, then living closer to the campus is obviously makes more sense for those students. Now, if students are happy to travel, if they don't mind a commute, if their budgets are a little bit more restricted, then moving out of town, further out of town, is going to open up your options for you. Then you need to think of the commute. So as we all know, Boston, the majority of the time has lovely weather, but coming into those winter months, you will be hit with heavy snowfall and cold temperatures. So where are you going to stay in terms of that accessibility? Are you going to be near a subway station? In terms of the social side, what kind of environment do you like to live in? So these are all of the things that you need to be thinking about. Then moving on to rotation, planning ahead. What I'm going to say to you again and again is try to plan as far in advance as you possibly can, because what that will do is that will reduce any chance of things coming up, unavoided costs that you didn't know about. So planning is really the key for that. You then will need to know what type of contract you need, because if you are going to rotate, you're not going to be on a full 1-year contract. So that really is key to plan ahead for, to understand what kind of contract you need to be. We don't want you getting into contracts that you're not going to be able to uphold, because that is then just going to make things more difficult when we don't really want that to be the case. Okay, and then finally, roommates. Who are you going to be sharing with? Are you wanting to do a shared bedroom? Are you wanting to have your own bedroom? Are you going to have your own apartment? So again, who are those people that you want to share with? And this is really, really important, why you need to be on our Facebook group. Okay, because the majority of those networks will be built through the Facebook group. We, of course, do have the WhatsApp groups for the different programs. I know that a lot of you have met in your own countries. So you do, of course, have those networks, but really the Facebook group is key for all things Boston. If you have not been added to the group, then please make sure you notify your enrollment advisor as soon as possible so that we can get you added manually to that group. Okay, so what happens next? The budgets. The key thing that is obviously probably the worrying factor for a majority of you. Moving to the US is going to be a significant financial investment, and this is why planning ahead is so crucial. Okay, what we've done here now, these are just averages. What I want to stress is that this isn't the kind of law and order, this is not exactly what the figures will be, but this is what, from speaking to students that are currently living in Boston, and from all of our research and from our knowledge of Boston, from our teams that are there, this is what you are looking at on average per month. So sharing a house with roommates, now we're looking at anywhere between 3 to 5 roommates in a house. You're looking at between $500 to $800 per month. Now, the higher up the scale is, the closer to campus you're going to be. For students who have a really tight budget, then you are going to have to compromise on things such as sharing with more people or living further out of town. We then have sharing apartments. So generally speaking, this will only be 2, maximum 3 people sharing if you are wanting to have your own room, and you will be looking anywhere between $800 to $1,300 per month. Again, the same rule applies for the closeness to campus, that the closer that you get, the higher end of the scale that you're looking at. So you can't expect to have a 2-bedroom shared apartment right next to campus for $800 per month. You will be looking nearer to the $1,300. Okay, living alone. For those of you who maybe have shared before, or who just have their own particular way of living and they are more comfortable living alone, then the biggest factor to look at that is that it is going to mean a much higher cost. That is the luxury that you get with living alone, but of course it does come with the price tag. So what we're looking at for a 1-bedroom department is anywhere minimum of $1,500 up to $2,500 plus. Now we've put up to $2,500. There are apartments which of course are more than that, but again, that is the individual's choice if that does fit within their budget. And then the utilities and kind of extra costs that you're going to be looking at, because what you will find is that the utilities and your TV and things as such are not going to be included in that accommodation cost. If you do find an all-inclusive with your utilities and television and internet, you will be looking at the higher end of the budget. Okay, so it will, if they add it in, it will of course add onto your monthly rent. So you're looking at around about $75 per month for your utilities, your gas, your electric, and then for your television and internet, anywhere up to $50 per month. Of course, you can shop around. There will, at the start of the term, because Boston is such a huge student environment, that there will, of course, be deals and things with the internet and television providers. So what best to do with that is to really speak to student services when you're on campus. And this, of course, isn't going to be something that you will do immediately, but this is something that you can discuss with them and see if there are any kind of deals on for when you join in Boston. So that's the budgets. Now where to look. And what we are going to do is we're going to give you a breakdown of some different areas. The different areas do then come with different price tags. What you will find is that the majority of the costs on here that we have are average 1-bedroom departments. Okay, the reason for that is because when we do our research, this is what the information is given. Now, when we speak to students, the key thing for you to think about is looking back to the budgets that we've set on the previous slide, but then the locations will then alter the prices. So on this slide, you'll see that Dorchester, for example, is a lot less expensive than Back Bay. Now, although if you are going to be sharing a house, you won't be paying this much. What you need to look at it is in relative terms. So Dorchester, if you're sharing a house, will still be less expensive than if you were in Back Bay sharing a house. Okay, if that makes sense. So a couple of sites that we wanted to give you, and when you get this presentation, you will see that it will, when you click on the link, it will take you straight through to the website. Okay, so it should be pretty easy for you to look into. I'm not sure whether you can see it on the screen as of now. I'm with Carrie at the moment and she can't see it. So when you do have the presentation by yourself, you will, as soon as you click the link, it will take you right through to the website. Okay, so Thrillist, what that site provides you with is just a general description of neighbourhoods, what is going to be the best location, what kind of environment the different locations and neighbourhoods have. And then Jumpshell, this will help you compare. So you will be able to look at commute times, you'll be able to look at the prices, you'll be able to look at, the student metrics, so what it is that students look for. And Jumpshell really helps you identify the differences and therefore choose your neighborhood that's going to be most suitable for yourself. Okay, so I'm not going to run through all of the different locations. You will see these names come up again and again in the slides because these are the areas that our students will most generally stay in. Okay. Then again, this is more for visual because we wanted you to be able to see comparatively with other areas, be able to put that against the budget that you have. Again, please don't be alarmed at the fact that everything is over the kind of $1,500 mark. That is because it is a one-bedroom department. So if you remember from the earlier slide, the one-bedroom department is looking at about $1,500 minimum. Of course, the shared housing is going to be a lot lower than that. Okay, so when you do have these slides, please look over the different locations. Use the two previous websites to compare these different locations so that you're able to identify which neighborhood is going to be best for you. Okay. Then what we've done here is we wanted to give you an idea in terms of commuting times, because for those of you that like to have a longer lie-in the morning, it obviously will be useful to stay closer to the campus. For those of you who are happy to travel, who maybe want to get a little bit further out of town, experience the outer perimeters of Boston a little bit more, then this gives you a good idea as to what kind of travel times you're looking at. So the inner circle is Hult. That is where you will be studying. That's just on the edge of Cambridge. In terms of the most popular, you'll see it's from the other side of the river. That's where the majority of students will be looking at. Now, you can, of course, stay in Cambridge. You will see that it also does pop into Somerville as well. So that inner circle, you're looking at around 10 to 15 minutes commute. Now, from my experience in Boston, Cambridge, you can do within walking distance. It's around a 12-minute walk. Obviously, just keep in mind in those winter months that the walking may not always be able to do. So just keep that in mind. The second circle, so going up to Park Square, Theatre District, Financial District, you're looking at around about a 20 to 25-minute commute to those areas. Okay, and then finally, if you were to go further out to the edge of Back Bay, maybe to Southend or to the South Boston waterfront, so that's really the further outskirts, that's the furthest out that students will really travel to. You're looking at up to 30, 35 minutes. Okay, so for those who commuting is a key factor, then this is really important for you to look at to understand where is going to be best for you. And then we've also included in here the subway map. For most of you, this will be your usual mode of transport if you are not in walking distance. In Lechmere, you'll see the red circle. That is where you would get off for Hult. Okay, so you'll be able to see what kind of stops you would need to be taken, what kind of changeovers you would need to be taken depending on the location that you're in. For those of you who aren't very confident with the subway system, then try and keep the changes as minimal as possible. Obviously that will reduce any mix-up and any lost students on their way to class. So really just look into the subway map and see what you're comfortable with in terms of commuting on the subway. Okay, we also do have the bus routes on there as well. The public transport is very good in Boston, although I know a lot of students are within walking distance, and also Uber is extremely popular in Boston. I know that myself, that it's very, very accessible and very reasonable prices as well. Okay, again, just a little bit more, this you will coincide with the subway map. Okay, so what we've done here is we've put the prices, again, for the one-bedroomed accommodation. We've put those onto a similar kind of tube map so that you really know where is going to be the best in terms of costs for you, but also where is going to be best in terms of location and travel distance. You'll see Lechmere is looking at around about $2,000, but that is for the one-bedroomed price. So that's in the middle of the road as such. And again, that is where Hult is located. Okay, so these are really for you to use after, when you're doing your research and you're working out. It's good as well to get an idea where places are. I know when I first traveled to Boston, it was trying to get your bearings and to work out where you were. So hopefully this will allow you to do so in advance. Okay, so private renting. What I've done here is I've just broken down the pros and the cons of private renting. Now, like I said, this is what we advise, just for your security. It does, of course, mean that you do have some certain requirements that you need to fulfill. But generally speaking, the private renting is going to be what the majority of you will choose. In terms of the pros, so of course you're going to feel more at home, more comfortable, and have your own space. Now, this is important with a program such as Hult, because it is so intense. You need to make sure that your home space is going to be as comfortable as possible. You may not spend a whole amount of time there, but when you are at home, it's important to feel comfortable and that you are able to relax in those spaces. You can find more appropriate prices for your budget. So the other type of accommodation we are going to talk about is more like a serviced apartment. Now, they of course come at a much higher cost because everything is included. Whereas with private renting, you're able to bring your budget down because you can compromise on some factors: the accommodation, the amount of people that you live with, of course, the living side of things, so they're doing your own laundry, the food, that's all going to be on your own budget. So you can then compromise and reduce your budget slightly. You then also have a greater choice of size of rooms, furnishings. Boston has such an eclectic mix of accommodation, new buildings, old buildings. So you really have a little bit more of an input as to what the kind of spaces that you want to stay in. Okay, and finally, the access to your own kitchen and living space. It's called amenity-based living, which is the kind of serviced apartments. You won't really have that, and you won't have your own kitchen or your own living space. Basically, it's like living in a hotel for a year. So with the private renting, you of course have the luxury of having your own space for that. Now, the cons. These aren't as much cons as they are things to keep in mind. So usually you will have to sign into a 12-month tenancy agreement. Now, for those of you who are going to be taking advantage of the global rotation program, I know that is going to be the first thing that springs to mind is, well, what do we do if we've signed into a 12-month agreement? We'll discuss that in a little bit. Something that we can think about for that, however, is rotation and other people that will be transiting to Boston on the rotation. Now, there are some legalities with that, which you would need to discuss with student services when you are in Boston, because obviously we don't want anybody getting into trouble for having different tenants in their accommodation. You will also find that you will have to pay for your TV, your internet, electricity, and water on top. So your bills, this is where the independence comes in, and you will have to manage the other costs of living independently. So that will add to your budgets, and it will mean that these are things that you will have to manage. So you will have to keep on top of paying your internet. You will have to keep on top of paying your electricity and your water bills. You also will be more than likely paid estate agents or letting fees. Now, we have got some estate agents for you to use, reputable companies that we've used previously. And if they are searching for accommodation for you, then it was more than likely that they will charge you a finder's fee. Now, for those of you who like that security of using professionals to find where they want to stay, for me, it's always a cost well spent. It gives you peace of mind and it makes the process a lot simpler. And then the other con is obviously that you have to visit these properties. You have to obviously take the time out when you get to Boston to go and look at the location. So it is going to take a little bit longer than just easily slipping into a kind of a hotel environment. So it will take a little bit more time, but if you are prepared to do so, then the private renting is definitely going to bring you the benefits. Okay, requirements for renting. So what does it mean? How do we do it? What do we need to do? They will vary dependent on the estate agents. You will need to make sure that you have all of the requirements from the landlord or the estate agent to make sure that things are going to go as smoothly as possible. Now, what we've done is we've shown that if you have the below factors, you're going to be in a really good position for renting. The first is the sufficient funds to pay rent in advance. Okay, usually that security to the landlord and estate agent makes the process a lot simpler. They then don't have to be chasing on payments. You then will be looking for a personal or employer reference. So basically, this is just to show that you will be able to fulfill the requirements, the personal reference that you are going to be a good tenant. Now, if you have rented previously, either in your bachelor's or in your professional life, then try and get a personal reference from somebody that you have already previously rented off to show your profile. Obviously, your passport and I-20. You will have your I-20 in hand because hopefully everybody knows by now, traveling to the US, you need to have your hard copy of your I-20 with you. So you will already have your passport and I-20. Your bank statements from your home country to show that you do have sufficient funds. If you don't have the sufficient funds, then you may require a co-signer, so a parent or a relative, to show that you are able to fund the rent. And then you will have your acceptance letter or proof of student status from the school as well. So these are all of the main things that the estate agent and landlords will look for. There may be other requirements depending on the landlords, but in general terms, this is what you will require. So general advice, this isn't kind of the whole total list. There will be frequently asked questions that will come up. There will be different things year on year. What I will say is that we cannot give you every single last detail when it comes to the accommodation, because you still have to have that responsibility and still have to be doing the research yourself. But from our side, one of the key things, especially with the beauty of Hult and the rotation program, is that you have a break clause. So that means that you're able to have a 6-month break in the rent, which means that you are able to then go on rotation and that you don't have any hidden costs. You're not obliged to pay any additional fees. So make sure you're discussing this with the estate agent or the landlord if you are planning on rotating. Now, very key, I know this myself from my years at university and being caught for damages that weren't my fault, is that it's really important to do what we call an inventory, which means that you will state the state of the property when you arrive. What we want to make sure is that any down payments, any deposits that you pay, that if you have kept the place in a good standing, that you don't lose any deposits paid. So you need to make sure you take pictures of the rooms, furniture, especially if you're in a furnished apartment. If there's any damages at all, just to make sure that you are not liable when you move out. Now, this was something I did not do in my first time that I rented, and I regretted it massively. And so for me, this is a really important thing to do, is to make sure that you do keep a record of the whole inventory and the status of the place that you are renting as soon as you arrive, because anything after that you will be liable for. Take your own current gas, electricity meter readings. Now, the agents and the landlords that we've worked with previously, have all been above board. But you will, of course, get the odd occasion where you're trying to be charged more, maybe for a previous tenant that hasn't paid. So as soon as you arrive on the property, make sure you take your own gas and electricity meter readings. And also when you move out, so that you know if there are any variances in what the landlord or the estate agent is giving you. And then finally, if your bills are not included, it is your responsibility for your water and energy providers to set up a new account. Okay, so it's not down to your landlord, it is not down to your estate agent, it is down to you. And this is where you really need to consider who you are living with, who is taking responsibility for what. Do not just assume that your housemate is taking care of it, because if you are renting that accommodation, you will be liable if things are not paid. So just don't assume that things are covered. Always ask the questions, because then you'll get the answers that are correct. Okay, so that's our top tips and general advice. Scams. Okay, now what I don't want to do is I don't want to alarm anybody, but if something, as it says very rightly at the top, if something sounds too good to be true, it probably is. Okay, so what we need here is a very logical head on everybody's shoulders, because although this very, very rarely happens, it does happen. And what we don't want is we don't want our students to be open to it. So occasionally the property advertised doesn't exist. It may not belong to the person placing the ad. But like I said, majority are real. What you need to do is you need to be aware of the below factors, because this will reduce the chance of you being scammed. So weak contact details. If there is only a mobile number, if there is no company name or number, if there's no website, if there's no landline, then it's more than likely that it might be a little bit of a tricky case. If there is a landline, ask for the landline and ring them back on the landline number. Lots of emails, phone communication. So what these fake landlords want to do is they want to build your trust. And by doing that, what they do is they will send a lot of emails, they'll engage with you a lot, and they'll really sell you the property. Now, that needs to have an alarm bells ringing to yourselves, because a standard estate agent, a standard landlord will not be as proactive with building your trust and really getting you to secure the property. Use Google, the wonderful world of the internet search that we have. Make sure that you are looking into the landlord, the agent, or the property where you are looking at. And if it states no viewings allowed, there is more than one reason why that will be. It will either be because the property doesn't exist and they're taking money in advance. It will either be that the accommodation is not in the situation that it looks like on pictures. So make sure that you are able to get the viewings. And if it says no viewings allowed, then I would move on to the next property. Okay, before you sign, because once you sign, this is when you are into the agreement. So the biggest thing you can do is ask questions. Visit the website, themass.gov, to review the landlord, to see previous tenant feedback, to see what your laws are and the responsibilities. And don't be afraid to ask those questions. Don't be afraid to request any changes if you are not happy. If there is something that you have verbally agreed, but it's not in the lease, then make sure that you are getting those changes before you sign anything. And don't do as a lot of students do, don't just skim through. Really make sure that you've read the full lease, because if there is any clause in there that they want to catch you with, it will be in the smallest place possible. So make sure you thoroughly go through, get a second opinion from one of your housemates or one of your friends. Get everything in writing and keep signed receipts for any payments made. Okay, make sure that you keep a record of all things that you have done. Generally speaking, if you speak about anything over the phone, what I would do is I would send a follow-up email confirming what you have agreed verbally. You also need to make sure that the copy of the lease is with you within 30 days of you getting into the accommodation. That is a requirement from the landlord. So make sure that they have provided you with the lease within 30 days. As we mentioned earlier, photograph any damages just to make sure that you're not being caught liable for anything that wasn't your fault. And know the difference between legal and illegal fees. You can find this all on the mass.gov, the tenant laws, and what you are or what you should be paying for and what you should not be paying for. Okay, don't worry, don't get too scared about this. Everybody's going through the same situation. You will have a mass of colleagues, of peers that are also in the same boat, and student services will be on hand when you do arrive at Boston to help you with any particular questions that you may have. Okay, so here what we've done is we've just listed some of the real estate agents. You will find these also on my Hult. This is where we will collect the information from. You of course have their local numbers on there. My advice is to discuss via email to start with, and then obviously when you get to the US and you want to arrange your viewings, because you will need to arrange your viewings when you get to the US. So then you will be able to contact them on their direct mobile. Then we have some search engines. So again, the blue hyperlinks will take you straight through to the search engines. These will help you make your search a lot easier. Okay, so they will help you identify where you want to be, how much your budget is. You can filter it all through to then give you the accommodation that you're looking at. Okay, that's all to do with private renting. Then we have the amenity style buildings. So it's classed as amenity style buildings in the US. For others, it's known as service apartments. We do have them here in Dubai. We have them in London as well. What this means is it's basically like living in a hotel. Okay, so you will have the majority of your things. You sometimes will have food included in that. You sometimes will have your linens, cleaning, your washing and your ironing sometimes is included. Again, you will need to contact these directly to ask them what packages they offer. Avalon is very close to Hult. What you can do is you can request what their package includes and make sure that you mention that you are a student of Hult. They may ask for your acceptance letter and they may be able to give you some discount. But these are all the ones, if you are wanting to stay in more of a service department, if you don't want to get tied into the 12-month contract, if you are wanting, shall we say, a slightly easier way of life, then this is what you will be looking at, okay? And again, what we have done here is we've broken down into what is included, the amenities that you have in these different buildings. We have the upfront costs, so what kind of deposits you're looking at, and then the prices. So for example, if we take Avalon, so you have the 2-bed apartment in North Point Lofts. You will be looking at about $3,500 for a 2-bed apartment. So that's about $1,750 per person. Okay. Now with that, there will be things included in that. You will see that you have to pay at least a $1,000 security deposit and 1 month's rent. Okay, so again, if this is something that I know for people's budget, this will be way above people's budget, so don't worry if it is. This is for people who want to have everything included and have that more simple way of living. And then temporary accommodations. What will happen when you get to the US is you, generally speaking, will not have secured anything as of yet. We do not advise you at all to sign up to something until you have seen it, because you never know what it may hold. So what we say is that you need to be getting to the US, getting to Boston about 2 weeks before your program starts, before registration starts, so that you can really get your accommodation sorted. What I advise my students to do is to book at least 1 to, if not 2 weeks in a temporary accommodation, so Airbnb, the Holiday Inn Express, we work with that a lot. Like it's a 15-minute walk to Hult. The 250 Monsignor O'Brien Highway, that's the one it's very close. We stay there in terms of staff all the time. So try and secure your temporary accommodation first, so that you have somewhere secure for then looking into your other accommodation. Okay, so that pretty much wraps up the accommodation. Hopefully I've given you a good overview as to what kind of prices you're looking at. Like I said, the majority on there is for 1-bedroom apartments, but like we mentioned in the budgeting on the first few slides, that will massively reduce if you are going to be sharing a house. If you've got any particular questions, I know that they're popping up on the screen now, so we're going to do a bit of Q&A. If anything comes up after that, then we can, of course, go through that afterwards. So what I'm just going to do is I'm just going to run through the questions that I have. From John, you notice that Hult Boston has its own accommodation. Is this an option for master students on rotation? Okay, John, so there is Boston accommodation. However, it is mainly for the undergraduate students. This year, we are launching the undergraduate campus in Boston, and we are doing accommodation for the undergraduate students. So generally speaking, no, but Hult does not have its own accommodation. However, we can speak to the student services team. It's something because the undergraduate campus is brand new for this fall. So as of yet, we've not had any information on it. I wouldn't bank on staying in Hult accommodation because it is for the undergraduate students. Okay. So Nakem, application fee. There is a clause on the apartment I am considering that says the deposit fee will not be funded if the application is not successful. Is this type of clause normal? Should I take a chance? Okay, Nakem, so what I would do, the website that I sent that was on the previous slide, the mass.gov, what I would do is I would look on there to see what the tenancy clauses are. If there are any specific queries like that, what I'm not going to do is I'm not going to tell you yes or no. I'm not an estate agent. I don't know every single rule and regulation when it comes to applications and living in Boston. So what we can do is we can discuss it with people, the enrollment team that are in Boston. But my advice in the meantime is to look on that website. Okay. As you have just said again, so you've seen an apartment that you like. Is it safe to sign a lease now, wait till later? Like I said, that I don't advise you to secure into anything straight away. What you can do is you can look at the reviews of the apartment that you like. If the reviews are good, if the landlord reviews are good and there's been no negative feedback, then you can sign into a lease. Now what that just means is that you don't know the location, you don't know what the actual accommodation is like. So what you can do, you can speak to your enrollment advisor, you can look at the feedback, but as of now, I wouldn't say that you can sign a lease straight away. But if you are set on it, if you love it, if it's within your budget, then you can go for it, but just make sure you do your research in advance. Okay, let me see what else I've got on here. We've got a few Q&A, I believe. Okay, so from Tobago, what are the costs for the temporary accommodation for a 2-week duration? Okay, so what I can speak of is the accommodation in the Holiday Inn Express, the one that the Monsignor Highway that I discussed. When we stay, we're looking at around about $125 per night. Okay, now depending on the type of year, that is something that you should secure sooner rather than later. So the temporary accommodation, the earlier you book, the cheaper that it will be, and obviously the more availability that you have. So that I would advise you to book sooner rather than later. You will be looking at anywhere between $125 to maximum $200 per night. Okay, let me see if I've got any more. I think that's all the questions. Has anybody got any other questions that they wanted to ask? Okay, so if there is anything at all, then what you can do is you can just let your enrollment advisor know. You can, of course, contact myself directly. I'm more than happy to do so. Like I mentioned, this webinar is recorded. So we will be sending to everybody going to the Boston campus, we will send you the presentation and the webinar so that you can go back through, you can double check any questions or queries that you may have. But like I said, that your enrollment advisor really is your point of contact. If you have anything that you are worried about or any questions you have. But I also want to stress that we don't want to spoon feed you with the accommodation. It is, we're postgraduate programs, so we really want you to be doing that research, spending some time, making the networks on Facebook, and really ensuring that you're doing everything you can to get the accommodation that you want. Okay, so thank you all for joining. It was lovely speaking to you. I know I've not spoken back too much. So if you've got any questions, then let us know. Thank you.